Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Distinguished Speaker Series. We're very excited to have Dr. Jacopo Annese be part of our virtual Distinguished Speaker Series. So we're thankful for that. I hope that you're all well, and of course, all of those around you are well also. These are very uncertain and different times for us, but again, I hope that you are all safe and well at home and doing your part in keeping yourself safe and others as well. In case you are not familiar with me, my name is Nancy Walters. I'm the Executive Director of the La Jolla Community Center, and I am extremely happy for you to join us for our virtual Distinguished Speaker Series. For those of you who don't know much about our community center, we are a nonprofit organization that serves adults and seniors, and we promote everything to do with lifelong learning, wellness, and friendship. So that includes special programming, classes, events, all of the above. Of course, we have changed to all virtual due to the current climate. So you are welcome to join us at on our website, which is ljcommunitycenter.org, to visit us and to see all of the programming that we have available. And I do want to share a screen with you so you see that what we have available. So again, for today, it's our Distinguished Speaker Series, and we're really excited to listen to Dr. Jacopo Annese in just a minute. But for next month, if you are interested in learning more about heart health and cardiology, please join us on August 11th, where we'll have Dr. David Adler joining us. And he is the cardiologist and medical director of heart transplantation at UCSD. So that'll be a really interesting program. I hope that you can join us for that. We also have our Wednesday Connect program, where we meet every Wednesday. And this is a great opportunity to engage, connect, and learn new interesting topics. For this week on Wednesday, July 15th, we have James Clarkston joining us, where we will be listening to him talk about music for the mind, body, and soul. And again, there's a lot of other really interesting topics and speakers coming up for the rest of the month. And if I'm going too fast, please feel free to join us on our website. All of this information is on there very clearly, and you can go at your own pace. We also have a really fantastic event coming up, a wine tasting, which you can do virtually in your own home. And that'll be on Wednesday, July 30th. We'll be exploring 2 wines from the oldest grapes in Italy, which should be really fantastic. So I hope you can join us there. And I know this text is very small, but again, you can see all this information on our website. We have a really wonderful course coming up. It's called Unstuff Your Life with Andrew Mellon, who is a nationally acclaimed speaker, author, and organizing expert. These are perfect times for us to really get organized in home and in life in general. So I hope that you can join us for that. Again, just a reminder that we have virtual classes. Many of them are free. Actually, most of them are free. Everything from meditation, yoga, art, on our, and it's available through our website. So you can visit us there. And perfect. So let me stop that. And again, a big thank you to all of you who are joining us today. We really appreciate the support virtually. We're all getting used to this new normalcy. So thank you again for that. Thank you for all of those who are continuously supporting us, whether it's just by joining a class or by actually making a contribution. Of course, we always welcome your support. So thank you for that. I also want to give a big thank you to Judy White, who is the underwriter for our Distinguished Speaker Series. We could not have done this without her. Of course, before this pandemic happened or started, we were having our Distinguished Speaker Series live and in person, and she was the reason behind that. She underwrote the series. Again, we've transitioned to virtual, but we still want to acknowledge her for her support. Okay, so now without further ado, I will introduce Dr. Jacopo Annese. Dr. Annese, PhD, is Assistant Professor in Residence in the Department of Radiology at the UC San Diego School of Medicine, President and CEO of the Institute for Brain and Society, and founder of the Brain Observatory and the Human Brain Library, a neuroimaging database to fight brain disease. In 2009, the observatory was charged with post-mortem examination and neuroimaging of the brain of Henry Molaison, a patient with severe anterograde amnesia, one of the most famous medical cases in the history of neurology. Dr. Annese is a computational neuroanatomist whose formal training stems from a wide background in the biological sciences and the neurosciences. He is particularly experienced in neuroanatomical and histological techniques and computer-aided microscopy and morphometry by neuroimaging analysis. He has designed novel techniques for the quantitative study of neurological structures with MRI histology. Dr. Annese's primary goal in the field of neuroscience is to conduct research that is open to public engagement and promote the highest standards in data sharing and collaboration within the scientific community. Dr. Annese graduated from the University of Rome in Italy with bachelor's and master's degree in biology and zoology. He earned a master's degree in neurological sciences at University College London and completed the PhD program in cognitive neuroscience at Dartmouth College. He subsequently trained in computational anatomy at the Montreal Neurological Institute, Canada, and at the Laboratory of Neuroimaging at the University of California, LA. His research has been featured in a variety of broadcasting and publishing media, including PBS, Nova, National Geographic, BBC, Discovery Channel, The New York Times, Bloomberg News, Financial Times, Esquire, and Discovery Magazine. Please help me welcome Dr. Jacopo Annese.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Good morning. Well, thank you, and for in the name of authenticity, where I'm broadcasting from my own home. The screen is there to not show you what the scientist's house looks like when a grant is due. So you will have the makeshift screen behind me. I have a correction to make from the introduction, and it was very long. I hope we haven't lost some people. I was a professor at UCSD in the Department of Radiology, but since 2015, I created a nonprofit, and so now I'm full-time with this independent nonprofit. It's called the Brain Observatory. I can begin sharing my, we decided with Barbara that if you have any questions, you can ask them at any time, and from time to time, I will answer them to the best of my abilities. So I'm going to start sharing the screen. As I mentioned, I'm writing a grant that is due 5 p.m. today, and so I can actually start talking a little bit about that because it's also about my research. So I will share my screen, if that works. I imagine that you can see it. So let's talk a little bit about the Brain Observatory and what the grant I'm writing is about. So the motivation for creating a new nonprofit was really to open the door lab to the public. I realized that the research that I was doing, and I also noticed that there were some benefits, direct benefits to people who partner work that it was very difficult to provide through the orthodox channels of academia, which is, publication and the press release, and eventually it takes several years from funding to really having an impact in the community. So the idea was to uproot the laboratory from the university campus and install it in a location where the public would have free access. What you see here, we've been working with schools that send their students, and what was nice about these are images from my former laboratory, UC San Diego. What was nice about the environment that we built was that the researchers themselves were acting as docents. So it was a sort of mixed museum and laboratory. And that's why you saw in the title page that the subline of the Brain Observatory is Open Laboratory and Neuroscience Museum. That is our goal now, is to create a blended space where research can occur, but it can also be displayed so that the public and students can learn about the process of research. It's a very ambitious project because there are barriers, there are difficulties in implementing this. So the grant that I'm writing now for the NIH is specifically to create this makerspace for high school students who work on brain images and train in neuroimaging, radiology, diabetes, and have the opportunity also to meet our patients from the laboratory. And this image here will give you an idea of the scale of the work. This is a that we used to display the images that we acquired from the brains. Now, there are two ways of looking at the brain these days. One is with MRI. An MRI is a wonderful tool because in a very short time, it can give you images of somebody's brain, either brain function or brain structure, and without obviously needing to do any pathology work, needing to work post-mortem. So we can to somebody's brain with a 10-minute scan. The problem with MRI is that MRI doesn't afford enough resolution. So we wanted to provide this information to the public. And then when I started researching about museums, I realized that there is a museum for about everything. There is even a banana museum in California, but there's no museum for the brain. So really, the idea of combining research with exhibits seemed like it was an important goal. And these are some images just to show you what this space like. Now, we're envisaging to have laboratories that are viewable by the public, and there are spaces for exhibits, spaces where people can also screen their brains to have checks, to kind of regularly check the state of the brain, even if they don't experience any symptoms. And we want to have lectures, just like the community center. In fact, you can imagine this space, something like the community center, but the La Jolla Community Center, but about the brain. And these are informal talks that we would provide for the public through the network of collaborators. And essentially, this space is intended to be a space that promotes brain health, promotes knowledge about the brain in young children or people of all ages. And this is what it will look like. We're actually looking now for real estate opportunity to open this new location in La Jolla or downtown. And so I take the occasion to remind everybody who's listening that I'm very open. In fact, I'll be very grateful for any input or help in achieving this goal. And now we get into the research part, which was also in the description of the talk. So what is the main research that we do? The Project Human Brain Library was born indeed with the study of a very famous patient who was the first to demonstrate that without a certain structure in your brain, you keep memories. You cannot keep long-lasting memories about events. What in the field they call declarative memory. So pteroid amnesia is essentially the inability to store information long term. You can still remember past events and have memories of your past, but you cannot make new ones. And working with this patient taught us a lot and taught us the importance of also connecting a person's medical history, biography, and essentially information about lifestyle and what happened in their life with the actual. And we talked about MRI before. So this is an image, a cross-section, a slice of an MRI scan. We're looking at somebody's head from above and about at the level of their ears. You can see that there are some white areas in these scans. And in this particular scan, the brain should look gray overall. So these small white spots or areas of diffuse higher signal are where the brain is sick, where the brain, when there is a disease process occurring. Now, in this particular case, what you're looking at are quite normal age-related effects, phenomena, features of anyone's brain over 50, over 60. And essentially, they're also very dynamic. They may come and they may go. If somebody my age or in their 70s scan their brains every week or every month, they would see this pattern changing because these are sometimes local causes of inflammation. But it's very important to study them because they also can hide more serious disease and actual physical damage of the brain. The problem with MRI I mentioned before is that as you try to look further into what's happening, into the actual underlying the biology of these images, you end up not seeing very much because this technology has one big limitation, which is the resolution. And so if you're wondering why this particular pixel on the images is therefore abnormal, this one is normal, you will not find out. In reality, what's underneath this, what they call voxels, MRI images, is this type of network. So what's in here is an image, a microscopic image taken with a microscope of a real brain slice that is actually processed and stained to reveal fibers. So now we're actually looking at the real anatomy of the brain at microscopic resolution. And when you hear about connectivity, when you hear about rewiring your brain, when you hear about the connectome, maybe some of you have heard about this project, which is a NIH project that wanted to understand the way brains are working by studying the connectivity between different areas. So how does thought get created in the brain? But in reality, if you look at this, you realize that understanding what goes on in the brain is a real daunting problem. It's a really big question because you have to understand where all this, and we're looking at now fibers. These things that look like fibers that are only few thousands of a millimeter thick. So in order to understand what really happens in somebody's brain, unfortunately, at the present point in time, is only possible by working with donated brains. These are images of cellular anatomy, fluorescent images, and I would like to get the feeling that the brain inside is a mesh of this very, very fine fibers, just like a tight sweater, a three-dimensional bundle, a three-dimensional sweater where all these fibers are really intertwined. There are cells, and it's really like looking at impressionistic painting. So you can imagine a brain slice or a cross-section of a brain being component cell types that create a pattern that we can see. And as we can really only see that by working with brains that are donated. So this is a brain library project. We look at things like books, and therefore the name of library was chosen because the process of transforming this brains into a collection of very, very thin slices that then imaged with microscopes and provide that level of detail that we need to understand disease, to understand what happens with aging, then those are like pages of the book. So my work is really reading. It's a lot of reading. Only the pages that I read are not pages of a book, but they are pages of the brain. I apologize for this strange analogy here. And the project essentially wants to connect anatomical detail in somebody's brain with their history. The big question there is, can we see in the brain what made this person who they were? Now, this is not only a project that is valuable after the fact, post-mortem. I mean, this is all information that informs those researchers and those clinicians who only work with low-resolution MRI. Because imagine that the patients that donate the brains to us to do this very detailed analysis, they do it to help patients in the future. And they create, with our help, it's data that a doctor in the world, as a matter of fact, can use to try to interpret the images and try to predict what the outcome for their particular patient. So you kind of know, it's like knowing the story, it's like knowing the plot of a movie, of a book, to make that analogy again. And this plot can help somebody else knowing what is in their books. And one of the things to distinguish the brain bank, so the Human Brain Library Project is in practice brain bank. as we said, we work with donated brains. But one of the things that distinguishes the Human Brain Library is that it is not only a repository of data, it's also a collection of stories. In fact, sometimes when I get calls from people and say, you know, I have a loved one who wants to donate their brain, or I want to donate my brain, I've been diagnosed with this particular disease, or I'm simply curious, or in some cases they say, I don't know what to do with it anyway, once I pass, so you can have it. Now, we have more brains than funding, unfortunately, but obviously what I tell this is that, first of all, there is never a brain that is not interesting. And the other tell them is that we're very interested in the story. So the brain itself is interesting to us as researchers if it comes with a story that we can connect to it. This, for example, is a story of June, who was diagnosed with ALS. And we worked with her for many years before she passed away. We acquired also MRI information. Now, the reason why I mentioned June is we also had another patient who we studied in 2012 who also had ALS. But it was an extraordinary experience because by working with both patients and really getting to know them, we could understand that even though the diagnosis was one line on their medical history, ALS, there was a there were very deep differences in the way that the disease had progressed in their brains. Some of this we could see with imaging. Some of this we discovered after we could work with their brain after they passed away. But the big lesson there was that sometimes patients are diagnosed with exactly the same name of a disease, and these are very big buckets that are useful in medicine. They're also in the clinical practice because there needs to be some descriptions that otherwise it'd be very the work of a doctor would be very difficult. But for a researcher, for example, June and Norman started this program in very different places. And I'm talking literally, Norman experiencing problems with his right arm when June started beginning with the left foot. In fact, it was the left foot. You know, ALS is a terrible disease because it creeps on you. Maybe many of you know somebody who's been affected. So we were validated in this approach, even if it's very cumbersome, because it's a lot of work to generate the data histologically and pathologically for the entire brain. A lot of data, a lot of images, thousands of images, and I don't want to show off terabytes, petabytes of image data. These are interviews that we used to record in the laboratory and understand who these people were. And their states are saved with their medical information, and they're saved, most importantly, with models and images of their brains that other researchers, educators can access via the web. Now, and Norman, I like to mention because he was a character. He had a very interesting story. He worked as a worker when he left home at 16. He was what they used to call, if I'm not mistaken, a hobo, jumping on trains, moving about the country like that. And he had a wonderful sense of humor, even in the last months of his disease. And this is an image he wanted to take in front of our refrigerators because he said that after he passed away, his brains would be there, and this would be his new friends. So just to tell you, and he posted this image on Facebook, just to tell you the consequences and the effects that sometimes are unpredictable in doing very close work with people, looking at people not as research subjects or as patients, but looking at them even if they have been diagnosed. This one of my favorite. By the way, you're looking at pages of a small booklet. Send the link to Barbara. This is an ebook wrote a couple of years ago, just to record the stories of one of our donors. Since this book was edited, Beth died last year, and it was as you can tell, she was 100. So we also work, and we're particularly interested in individuals of what we call successful agers, people who don't get any disease, and they remain. Please forgive a non-scientific terminology, but they remain sharp throughout their lives. And this was another lesson that we learned, because when we did scan Beth in the MRI scanner, and we did that several times, we saw a lot of atrophy. We saw a brain that looked like it could have come from a patient who had been diagnosed with Alzheimer. And on the contrary, she was very, very, social life. She had no memory problems. And in fact, she was quite a character, because she was very feisty. She was probably the toughest love I ever received was from Beth. And there are anecdotes you discover about your brain's lives, and I think famously Beth was one of as a child, worked on the set of The Wizard of Oz, and was one of the fly monkeys in one of the filming. She explained that they didn't always use the same children depending on when they were filming. So it's also exciting for Richard to come out of the lab and actually start meeting people instead of being stuck at. Another person we met is Charles, a resident of Lemon Grove, a full-time resident of La Jolla, San Diego. He was passionate about cars. He had a Grove back in the 30s. He also died a few years, and also at the age, I think, of 101, if I'm not mistaken. So another successful ager, and until the very end, Charles was well known or notorious for having lots of girlfriends, and he always said that love is something that he actually was always surprised. He used to say when he was in his 90s, he said he was always surprised how these wonderful ladies who were so much younger than him and only in their 80s had any romantic interest in him. So a wonderful character, and his brain is also preserved in our collection, and we look forward then to share the information with the rest of the world, as a matter of fact. We work with Alzheimer's patients, and normally the work with Alzheimer's patients is more challenging, because by the time we get to know them, they're already experiencing serious cognitive decline. And so we usually work to understand what their experience was like. This again, it provides to me personally provided insight into the research side of a disease like Alzheimer, everything that has to do with caregiving, that sometimes with really serious consequences in terms of financial consequence, happiness. It takes a toll on happiness and financial stability for a family to have a loved one who suffers from Alzheimer or serious cognitive decline or other types of dementias. So remember, these are all elements that eventually motivated me and kind of at some point reached a threshold in which I felt that the work in purely academic research in an environment where there are prerogatives that confine you to protocols that are, in my view, somewhat dry, and for good reasons as well. But I thought that there was a way to maintain research rigor and to also, like I mentioned at the beginning, make my research useful and beneficial to the participants, because we had such a close relation with our participants and their families that one thing for them. So in the case of Alzheimer's patients, one of the way we contribute back is by helping them really happened in the brain. And often Alzheimer's is misdiagnosed. There are other types of pathologies happening in the brain, for example, a lot of dementias occur with microvascular disease that has to do with chronic hypertension. And so it's important for a family to know if their grandfather or grandmother or great-grandfather eventually had really this disease or something else, because it can instruct and it can help the family make the right decisions. We will talk eventually about, I'll spare a few minutes, although this is somebody that everybody, about diet and lifestyle on dementia as we go through the other patients. We had the occasion of working with examining the effects of concussion. Ray was a 20-year-old kid who experienced a concussion playing football in high school, and sadly, after a year, his behavior degraded to the point that he took his own life. So sometimes, they say, careful what you ask for. Sometimes this personal involvement and this very deep interaction with the brains, it's also something that can be difficult emotionally. But it's important. It's part of the disease. It's part of the context. And so Ray, by the way, is a very important case because he's one of the youngest known he's not a professional, athlete, who had this very, very severe behavioral changes, just like Junior had back in the days. And it kind of repeated that story. But if we find this CTE, or chronic traumatic encephalopathy, in the brain of Ray, then it really means that this is a condition that may affect hundreds of thousands of high school students. Because a small take-home message is, and something that for me is very important, is that professional athletes in the NFL are now pretty much taken care of. NFL has taken steps in protecting brain health for their players, pressure of the public, because this problem was exposed eventually. The population really that's most vulnerable now are high school students. And if you remember at the beginning, I was talking about the grant. Well, it's targeted to high school students. And high school students also from underserved communities who maybe are in schools or live with families who may not have the neuroscience literacy to understand if there has been if a problem exists in terms of behavior or brain pathology. So we're trying to make high school students aware of the brain, and so that they can protect themselves, not just from injury, but also from using drugs and making choices that adolescents make at that age. So this sort of personalized teaching approach at the Brain Observatory is meant really to make them more about their brain, because the brain ultimately is the most important asset, especially in a young person's life. They cannot hope to have any future, especially in this era of technology and information technology, going to be requiring lots of brains and maybe less muscles. And we need to make sure that now children and adolescents take care of their brains. I saw excuse me, on screen that internet connection is unstable. I hope that there hasn't been any issues. Maybe Barbara has a way to let me know. Otherwise, I will keep going. When I talked with Barbara, she wanted me to mention Donald, who was a painter, and to mention the fact that the Human Brain Library is not only a project that looks at necessarily disease of the brain. As I mentioned at the beginning, the project, the overarching goal, is to understand what makes us who we are. So when we meet, we had the occasion to work with people who have a demonstrated talent, or that have dedicated their life to a particular professional and that have been successful. Now, when I talk about success, it doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of people who have talents and that we don't have talent. It's just that sometimes we don't discover our talent. Successful to me means the ability to do what we like and do what we do best and make a living with it. And that's what he did. So this brain to me was very exciting. And in fact, I'm working with a scientific publisher to do an atlas of the brain, but based on his brain in particular, because my background is in vision research. My background is on the brain's visual cortex, which is actually at the back of the brain. So to me, to study the brain of a painter, it reminds me of my PhD days, but also, gives me kind of a real world example of all the concepts I studied, like the fact we perceive color, form, movement in different parts of the brain. So when we look at somebody's running, that image stimulates many different parts of the brain that connect their information. And you remember those spaghetti-like fibers, that's what they're for. They're for connecting this information that is analyzed by specific brains of the brain that are specialized for a specific attribute of the visual scene, and they put it all together in giving me the perception of this person that runs. Color or not color. So now in Donald's brain, I can revisit all of these concepts and really say, this is the area where he used when he was choosing the colors to paint his horses. He lived in Vedas, and he was very well known for making portraits of racehorses. So maybe some of you know somebody who has some of his paintings in his house. I have one. It was donated by his estate, and I'm very glad to have one of his paintings as a reminder of my work with him. And finally, I want to mention a dear friend of mine that sadly also passed away. Now, not because his brain had anything wrong. He had a wonderful brain, but he was like a lot of Europeans, a heavy smoker, and that caught up with him, and eventually developed lung cancer. And he always joked with me because he said, I'll give you my brain, but anyway, you're gonna go before me, so it's no problem. And unfortunately, I'm not sorry to say fortunately or unfortunately, but he passed away before me, so he wanted to donate the brain. And my friend Roberto had a restaurant called La Strada in San Diego. Some of you may know it. And now eventually the restaurant closed. But this is the point in the talk where I'm supposed to give you a bit of advice, in terms. But I'm sure that you know already that. And Roberto's advice here is not to smoke first, but also to try to adhere to a Mediterranean lifestyle with olive oil. I mean, this is one of the only real factors that has been proven scientifically from many population-based studies to have an effect on delaying the onset of dementia. We're not talking about Alzheimer as a disease, but we're talking about cognitive aging. So really, which is when especially is also with mild exercise is very important. I'm sure you heard this before. And the reason for this being is that brain health is ultimately is related to cardiovascular health. And I heard that next week. I saw that you will be hearing from cardiologists. So I think our work is complementary because these are very essential organs in our brains. Work that the health of one really affects the health of the other. So mentioned hypertension before, lesions in the brain, very, very insidious microscopic lesions that can lead to dementia. And to finish about the brain library, this is the vision. So, the Library of Congress has a mandate to preserve books, to preserve publications, to preserve culture, and to preserve the product of the human intellect. You can imagine that the Human Brain Library is like a Library of Congress, but for the brains, which are really the engine of this intellectual power that we have. The image that you see on the right is a library that I'm always in awe when I visit Yale. It's a special collections library. And so the vision for, remember I mentioned that there are thousands and thousands of slides that we preserve that contain microscopic information about the brain of the particular person. So I want you to imagine that just special collection. These slides are saved in temperature control vault, and they are really a resource and an archive that will be used in the future to understand what was the state of the brain in our generation or in this century. Sometimes I wonder how wonderful it would be if we could have seen the brain of Michelangelo or Leonardo da Vinci. We can't, but my hope is that 100 years from now, or even 10 years from now, after the cell phones and the internet, who knows what other effects that will be subject to, how the human brain. And so it's good to have a reference. So you can look at this also as an archaeology project. And neuroarchaeologists will go back and say, this is the brain of people who lived in the 20th and 21st century. They have all the information they need to connect that data with lifestyle. And I think they're informative in the future. So to conclude, the vision is that of really it's a two-pronged approach. One, as we talked about, is trying to empower this new leap in neuroscience that can only happen if we go deeper in imaging the brain and brain disease. Because we are reaching the limit of what MRI can do for us in terms of diagnostics, in terms of understanding these processes in the brain. In fact, it's no coincidence that now in the field, in my field, the same MRI technique now is scaled across thousands, if not tens of thousands of individuals. So what researchers can do now is to use MRI on a lot of people and look at effects that even if there is low resolution in each individual, by averaging this information across thousands, if not, like I said, tens of thousands of individuals, they can see patterns. So now we are essentially expanding the scale of MRI studies, but at some point also we'll reach a ceiling. And so the next leap in neuroscience is going to, at least for the human brain, most studies can, where you can sacrifice an animal and you can make a very predictable experiment. And some of the most beautiful things in neuroscience now are only applied to mice. But unfortunately, mice cannot tell you how you feel. I'm quoting Beth here. So in terms of human studies and the human brain, the next leap can only happen, I believe strongly, with the study of donated brains. And of course, there needs to be adequate funding. And the other approach that I mentioned is the fact that while we do this study, this very detailed study on donated brains, the goal of the organization that I started, and that is now, growing, experiencing the same growing pains that every nonprofit or 501c3 is experiencing. The other goal is to keep people healthy as well, brain healthy. So as we generate this knowledge, we apply this knowledge and we share this knowledge and we share our tools, including MRI, with people with the goal of giving them a little more, giving them the tools to make the right choices to stay brain healthy and to achieve a longevity of the mind and cognitive health. It's very important in our lives as everybody is getting older and older. The brain, I said before, is the most important asset in a young person's life. But as we become older, the brain is really what enables us to maintain positive interpersonal relationships and to maintain interests and to maintain purpose in life. So it's very important, I believe, that we have the tools and we have the knowledge to do what we can, even if there is no silver bullet, but to do what we can to stay brain healthy as long as we can. And some of these methods work. It's just a matter of being aware of what works for you or what doesn't. I think I'm open to questions at this point. I will stop sharing the screen. I may give a little time to write down my phone number because definitely any help, feedback, input, advice as we develop our business plan, which also the beginning includes finding a location for this branch, let's call it like that, let's give it this nickname. And we spoke with the mayor, we spoke with county supervisors, the city is on board, and now we need to find the space and start our programs. COVID-19 made me focus on individual programs that can be more controlled rather than opening a very large venue for the public. Like Bara said at the beginning, we have to take into account this uncertainty. So I'm focusing, like today's grant, on specific programs. But as I mentioned, we could use help in many forms. So my information is here, especially if you want to contact me with more questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Annese, for sharing your fascinating work. I think we all appreciate that, and strive to learn about the brain as much as we can to keep healthy and well throughout our journeys here. But I do want to share a question that we got asked, and a participant asks, "We want to hear how we can preserve our memory and other brain functions."
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, Barbara? Well, YouTube is crowded with talks and information about how to maintain brain health. And as I said, diet and exercise, obviously. Nobody knows, very few people have the luxury of knowing exactly what is their perfect diet. So we have to, because it would involve a genetic testing, some offered by 3andMe and companies of that sort. However, we don't have that information, unfortunately, to really know what works for us, as I said before. The Mediterranean diet, because has been used in clinical trials and has been shown to slow the process of cognitive decline. These are studies that are based on small groups or big groups, but they pull together information from many individuals. So they're looking at trends and statistical analysis that gives us a certain level of reliability for the study in question. So I would caution about, the study said this, the study said that, but definitely from talks I heard from doctors and people who are working on Alzheimer's all their life, that is definitely one of the things that is the easiest solution at the moment. And the Mediterranean diet is rich in oil, olive oil, low saturated oils like olive oil, avocado oil. I'm Italian, so of course I publicize olive oil primarily, and I also would like to defend gluten. Gluten, not everybody is intolerant. I think few people are celiac. The gluten can cause inflammation in organs, including the brain. But this happens when the flours that we eat, or they're very highly processed. So the things that personally I do, and you'll have to kind of talk in 30 years to see if it worked. But I don't eat processed food. I eat food is always fresh. And so the breads that I eat contain gluten, but these are flours that are not processed, and they are by the nature they're low in gluten. So again, there are some trends, but vegetables. These are really and walking to maintain a good oxygenation of the brain. If something happens and there is a concern, diet and exercise cannot be the cure, but learning to keep a very healthy lifestyle helps also if there is a diagnosis, because it has been shown that the outcomes in patients with a similar diagnosis is different and varies depending on the type of lifestyle and also the personality and the overall environment. So positivity, I don't want to transcend into less scientific domains, but this would be my best answer. And there is really a lot of information out there, but sticking to these two main strategies, I think it's a safe bet.
Thank you, Dr. Annese. A question asked is, what has the medical community found most fascinating about your research? Anything that they can apply or use in their assessments of brain disease?
Well, I think one of the most used resource that we shared is the brain of that famous amnesic patient that we talked about before. I didn't include any slides about him because last time when I spoke at the community center, and it was actually in person, spoke a lot about him. You can find a lot of information on if you Google patient HM, brain, my name, it's right there. Now, because the media was very interested, you heard some names thrown out there like National Geographic. So this was a study that revealed a lot about this patient that was studied by researchers for 50 years. His amnesia occurred in 1953 and he died in 2008. So one of the most used resources is actually this map of this atlas of the brains that we created and we made available via the web. And I get 3 or 4 requests every day by educators, students, or researchers around the world. The reason why it's used because it is, in my view, it's popular because this is a case that always features in neuroscience textbooks, so students have assignments to do, but also because there is this functionality where you can zoom in and look at the really cellular detail. Now, the impact of this medical case was great, so the impact of this brain atlas that we published is great. The other brains have not been published to the extent of patient HM, but I think the most important thing that collaborators have looked for is it's very scientific. It's really the connection between MRI imaging and the very, very fine architecture. And that is something that not many labs can afford to do, not just financially, but about operationally, because it requires very specialized equipment. So we cannot give them a virtual laboratory to use, and they want to understand, I'm looking at these effects on the MRI, what do they mean? And we provide images that can make the translation and solve that riddle. So this is generally the most used type of data.
Thank you. Another question is, what are the signs that one can recognize in oneself of the beginning of deterioration of memory or other brain functions?
Well, it's very difficult, and that's why a lot of the diagnoses happen late. My expertise are not necessarily, primarily in Alzheimer's disease or cognitive impairment and mild cognitive impairment, but there are publications and it's known that sometimes what has been diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment then was resolved. The problem is that maybe they're not re-diagnosed, so they're not tested again. These individuals are not tested again, and therefore they don't report that they got better. Now, when I mention these cases, it's because there is something that is our cognitive reserves under strain, and the older we get, the more strain, the less strain they can. I worked all night on the grant, and I can tell it's not the same as when I was writing my dissertation when I was in my late 20s. We get fatigued. So a lot of people misconstrue the effect of stress, the effect of too many tasks at the same time, and other conditions as a cognitive decline or memory problems when this gets resolved. So one of the things to look for I think, is disorientation. Disorientation. So remembering everybody. This is a famous kind of statement, a famous aphorism. And what if you forget where you put your keys, is okay. If you forget what the keys were for, then there is a problem. So I think that disorientations in terms of not only where I am or in the disorientation in maintaining a schedule of your task, that could be an indication that you processing information slower. And so it's important to, the most important thing is to always be aware of oneself and know oneself well. Physically, for example, most successful people in terms of physical health are the people that have a good body image, and they know their body and they know when something changes. So they perceive changes in the way they feel, in the way that they move right away, and they can correct them. Same with the mind. If somebody knows themselves very well and does not live a distracted life, so a term that is very in vogue is mindfulness. The way I look at mindfulness is keeping track of the way that I interact with the world mentally. And so I notice when I don't interact the same way. In this week where I was writing and I had this deadline, I noticed that things like a leaf blower, which I generally do dislike even when I'm perfectly happy or not busy, but noises and other activities or distractions that would happen, I was not irritate me. So I felt a certain amount of irritation and shortness of patience. And that to me is an indication that my brain is not working well, that I need rest. If that feeling of irritation and distress because of noise would continue, I would seriously think of, would continue over weeks, I would seriously think of looking at a health professional to say, okay, this is not normal. I am not usually this way. And I think that's not as well as ourselves. And I think my role is to give you an MRI and also look at your brain. But your role in this, and we're in this together, healthy, your role is to really know how you feel, and especially get older, and we remove clutter and we remove non-essentials in life. This work should be easier, and we can maintain concentration and then have a better idea of what we need to function. I think that's my best answer. It's not. It was a very difficult question.
Thank you, Dr. Annese. One more question and we'll wrap up. Says, what do you think about things like doing crossword puzzles to preserve memory or brain power?
The jury's out. There's no yet scientific evidence. I consulted for a company called Lumosity. I don't know if you, we were actually wanting to do a partnership between the Brain Observatory and them, because for them the brain is from those folks in San Francisco, they have a beautiful office, typical startup office with a full bar and pool tables and all that, a lot of showing off, but of venture capital. But for them, the brain of their users. So Lumosity was a website some of you may be familiar with that offered these brain games online and offered to track your performance. Now, when it comes to this function, which is tracking the performance, it relates to what I was saying before, and so they can be useful because if you see you're not doing that well, but the same test very well over time, or you're degrading in your performance, it could be a small alarm, a faint alarm. However, you could also be tired of doing the same test or similar tests. So I wouldn't use that as your measure, as your yardstick for your function. But so going back to this idea, Lumosity, but these brain games at the beginning they made the claim that it would protect people from cognitive impairment, and they were fined or at least cautioned by the FTC because they cannot make that claim. It's not proven. To them, people using their software online and have millions of users are just millions of black boxes that push buttons. So our collaboration was going to be to work with a selected number of their users to see who they really are and what their brain looks like and follow these games. So Sudoku, playing cards. If there is a positive, to the best of my knowledge, and from what I read, is if there is a connection between that and cognitive longevity, is also because these activities tend to involve other people, apart from a solitaire, and therefore it is the social context that maintain active some cognitive things that are essential to feel whole and not to experience problems. So I'm afraid that the brain games is not proven. The positive effect is not proven. If they're entertaining and pleasurable, I would do it, but I would also take a walk with a friend if walking is a possibility, even a short distance. If that's my personal advice, but it's only an advice and a personal opinion.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Annese, again for joining us for our Distinguished Speaker Series. We're very thankful for you to have joined us. And again, thank you for sharing your fascinating work. It's amazing. We'll all, I'm sure, check out the Brain Observatory and hope to learn more. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. I hope that you can visit us again soon. Again, you can see all of our programming that we have available at www.ljcommunitycenter.org. Thank you again, Dr. Annese.
Thank you.